This module has been commissioned by Fédération Internationale de Gymnastique specifically for coaches. It's intended to help you create and maintain safe and inclusive environments for gymnasts and for those working in gymnastics at any level. Sport provides a positive experience for the vast majority of participants, including gymnasts, coaches, medical teams, volunteers in clubs and sports administrators. All sport involves some jeopardy or risk, and your role is to minimise those risks. When it comes to safety, participants should not be subject to physical harm, and we're all familiar with assessing safety on equipment and in routines. But safety can also relate to emotional or psychological harm, sexual harm or abuse or bullying. The language used in safeguarding can be confusing. We often use the word safe sport because it translates better into many languages. But there are many ways that people will talk about harm caused and the responses we make. Sometimes we refer to harassment and abuse, or to non-accidental violence, to gender-based violence or to child protection. All these terms are relevant and used in different contexts and perhaps in different countries. There are no right or wrong words. One easy way to explain safeguarding is to say that it keeps participants safe from harassment and abuse and guards athletes' rights. Safeguarding describes the proactive steps to create a nurturing and welcoming environment where athletes can learn about sport and performance, and where they learn to understand when and how to raise concerns about an athlete's well-being, or about a situation they may have witnessed, or about a colleague or other's behaviour that has fallen below standards or might be harmful to someone in the sport. Safeguarding requires an army of people and organisations. As a coach, you are one part of the jigsaw and a really key and important part, but it's important that you know who else you can turn to, either for help and support or to help foster the right environment for your gymnasts to thrive. Everyone in gymnastics should understand their role in facilitating a safe and respectful environment as a coach, and positively developing a supportive and trusting relationship with your athletes that does not cross the boundaries of a professional coach. As a coach, you have a very special position in sport that must be carefully managed. Outside of family and school, a sports coach is probably the first person of authority a young person will meet. Coaches can wield an incredible amount of power over athletes, and it's critical you understand and acknowledge this. Harassment and abuse occurs across society, and particularly where there's an imbalance of power. We shouldn't be surprised that it also happens in sport or to those involved in sport. Abuse could happen to anyone, but some are much more vulnerable than others because of their age, background or situation. For example, children, those from marginalised communities, people with disabilities, children who are isolated because of language or who may be away for long periods, such as on training camps, and may have nobody to speak to or seek help from. Even if the abuse is happening outside sport to someone in gymnastics, you should take steps to help address and report it through the right process. Boys and girls, men and women can all be victims of abuse, and both men and women can be perpetrators. Peer-on-peer abuse is the most common form, especially amongst athletes, and it frequently manifests itself as bullying. But sexual harassment can also be a major concern. Peer-on-peer abuse can also happen between staff or between coaches, and this can impact the environment that you're working in and your gymnasts are training in. If you allow these behaviours to be normalised without challenge, it can create a culture of fear that can allow other forms of abuse to develop, so it really must not be ignored. We know that abuse happens in every sport and at all levels globally. Team sports are no less vulnerable than individual sports, and age is not necessarily a clear indicator of vulnerability. Sports uniforms also have been shown to have very little bearing on the levels of abuse. But if there are no reports of abuse in your country or your sport, you cannot assume that there is no problem. You should be confident, though, that you can be part of the solution. What makes sport such a rich area for potential abuse? Academic reports suggest that there are a number of characteristics of sport that make it an ideal place for abuse to thrive. This is why, over the last 5 years in particular, the Fédération Internationale de Gymnastics have introduced an excellent programme of safeguarding, beginning a journey to embed and implement safe sport measures for everyone across the sport. Sport systems are by their nature hierarchical and autocratic. Coaches wield an immense power in being capable of holding an athlete's future, their selection, their success and their funding within their control. And athletes can often be away from home for long periods in highly competitive environments, which makes them really vulnerable to abuse and pressure. Their success depends on their performance. The end result is all important. Where one gymnast wins, the other loses. So the pressure to comply with instructions for young people without question is huge. Working to eliminate practices that are discriminative or marginalise individuals is really important, because they're more likely to allow sexual and gender harassment to thrive, which might encourage hazing or sexual abuse to take place. So, for example, the introduction of consultation with your gymnasts, even where the rules don't explicitly require it, can help create a more collaborative relationship. Other ways of doing this, such as removing excessive weight control of athletes and moving to a more athlete-led target setting and programme setting, can also help transform the culture. In spite of all the negatives in sport, there is research on safeguarding across sport that's indicated that it may be a safer place for many young people. And whilst harmful abuse may occur, it may be at lower levels than in general society. So your role is helping your gymnasts find the road to success. And this really relies on building a trusting and open relationship where there are no surprises. Regular meetings between you and your gymnast, with parents if they're younger, to set targets together and to set out expectations or commitment are really helpful. Ultimately, it's important to remember that the success they have is theirs, and you are there to help them to find the right path. Sometimes coaches can forget this, and they drive their athletes beyond their capability or capacity in search of the coaches, the teams, or the club's goals and ambitions. Be sure to understand the limitations of your role and use others with expertise to advise on things such as medical treatments, rehabilitation and nutrition. Make sure that you avoid close relationships and one-to-one meetings or frequent phone calls with your athletes alone. Keep that relationship as professional as you can. And ask the right people the right questions. Treat each other with respect. When relationships break down amongst the staff or become abusive, the culture can trickle down onto other coaches and other staff and onto the athletes or between athletes. And be respectful of others that you're working alongside. Remember the coach's power, and you have the opportunity to set the culture in the training and competition environment. Keeping your communication channels open with your gymnast and team around the athlete is really important, but ensure that you respect their confidentiality. Don't expect to know all of their medical records if they don't want to share them, and only share information on a needs-to-know basis. Your relationship with your gymnasts must be respectful and between an adult and an adult. Coaches can often feel very vulnerable when we talk about safeguarding. There's a perception that many of the high-profile safeguarding cases in sport centre on coach-athlete abuse. And coaches can become defensive in case of malicious allegations against them. But there really is very little evidence of this. In fact, coaches are not the most common perpetrator of abuse in sport. But as we've already discussed, they have a key role in creating the culture that can enable or prevent an abusive environment. In 2010, Celia Brackenridge, a safeguarding pioneer, spoke about the key dimensions of protection in sport. Although Celia was always entirely athlete-focused, she was clear there were several levels of protection that coaches and sports scientists, or anyone working closely with athletes, had a duty to put in place. These include protecting the athlete from others, protecting the athlete from oneself, protecting yourself from the athlete and others, and protecting your profession and organisation in a broader sense, bystanders. It is really key to note that abuse, both legally and morally, can be both by commission or omission. By this, we mean that abuse can be something a perpetrator intentionally or unintentionally does to cause harm, or it can be harm occurs because somebody has failed to provide adequate care, such as not providing enough drinking water, not ensuring an injury is completely rehabilitated, or that an athlete has sufficiently rested before trying a complicated or dangerous routine. It's also possible that by doing nothing when you've seen or heard abusive situations, you condone and encourage a culture of abuse. Allowing poor behaviours, whether these relate to safety on equipment or the use of discriminatory language, or even allowing a close relationship to develop between a fellow coach and athlete without question, all encourage and enable other forms of harassment and abuse. So, what does a safe environment look like in gymnastics? Each of these statements is carefully written and non-negotiable. Think about how you can positively use them to improve your training and competition environment. Make sure that the athlete's welfare is always your first consideration. Secondly, a safe environment is one where coaches work with and listen to their gymnasts. It's a place where an athlete will feel comfortable in questioning and asking why sometimes, or even saying no to their coach. It's an environment where there are no favourites. It's really important not to have favourites or even the perception of favouritism. It's an environment where competitiveness is promoted in a positive way. Competition is good, but so is failure in many ways in teaching young people to be more resilient and to improve their performance. A safe environment is one where winning well is valued over winning at all costs, where roles are clear and defined and people stick to them. And it's one where families are welcomed to practice. Particularly with your young gymnasts, if families do want to come and watch, it's really important to give them the opportunity where it's possible for them to come in and to keep that environment open and trusting. And lastly, but really importantly, there is no extreme idolisation of coaches or others. It's incredibly important to make sure that everybody's actions can be questioned and there is nobody who is deemed to be an untouchable. Your gymnasts have put together 10 golden rules of gymnastics to help them to really enjoy their sport. And it's really important that you as coaches also have some principles for your work. Remember, the welfare of the gymnast is always paramount. It's incredibly important that you acknowledge and recognise that power imbalance and act to mitigate against anything that might put you or a gymnast in a vulnerable position. Remember that safeguarding is everybody's business in gymnastics and that you can't unknow what you know. If you become concerned about a situation or an individual's behaviour, you should always act on that and make sure that you know how to act and how to report it through the right procedures. It's okay to recognise that the picture can look confusing, and that's why there are other people who can help you to be able to find the right solution. Make sure that you reduce these challenges by working together as a team and using people with the right expertise. And of course, culture eats strategy for breakfast. No matter what policies and procedures you have in place, if people don't follow them and don't behave to the standards you expect, the policies are meaningless. Lastly, let me finish by saying that safeguarding in gymnastics is not rocket science. Treat people with the respect you would expect to be treated and that you would expect your children and your partner to be treated.